Welcome to Inside the Care Home. This is a podcast for care home owners and senior leaders who are trying to run outstanding care services in a world that's getting more complex, more digital, and more demanding by the year. Each episode is an honest look at the decisions, trade-offs, and mistakes that sit behind the day-to-day reality of operating a care home, where data and digital systems shape outcomes, but it's leadership that determines whether they help or hinder. This isn't about tools or trends. It's about thinking clearly, leading well, and building care homes that are sustainable for the people who live in them and the people who run them. So let's get into it. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at our DigiHive event for this month. We've got a podcast that we're recording for you today, and we're going to be talking about a really important part of running a care home, and that's our teams and our staff. And we're going to focus a little bit about the every HR data that we're collecting in our homes and how that can link into our staff retention. And from my 20 years in this sector, I think most care homes don't just lose staff suddenly. In my experience, I think we lose staff pretty slowly, and we only sometimes realise that somebody was unhappy when a resignation letter lands on our desk. That then leads to us as managers and owners and operators having to scramble around, trying to fill shifts. Our agency costs go up. The team that stays behind is a bit more stretched, and that's really frustrating. And I think what I'd like to get out of today's conversation is that there's a lot of data that we're already sitting on as providers that could have helped warn us that there was an issue, whether it's the sickness record, whether it's a supervision, whether it's a training log, or whether it's an appraisal. But sometimes, instead of giving us clarity as owners and operators, sometimes these systems just create more paperwork for us and don't offer the insight that I think they can deliver. Then as a sector and as leaders, sometimes we could be a bit lazy and say, well, staff turnover is just kind of unpredictable and it's part of the sector that we work in. But I'm really hopeful today that we can explore this idea and basically debunk it. Because the truth is, I think retention isn't random. I think there are signals, there are patterns, and there are early warning signs that are in our everyday HR data as a care home owner or a care home manager. And sometimes we get these little snippets from our team members that they're slightly disengaging before they decide to walk out the door. And if we as leaders can identify that, retention is the key word, isn't it, for us in our sector? So today, as we're going to unpack this, I'm really delighted to be joined to help explore this topic by Sonia Rai, who's an HR specialist and who works closely with care organisations across the sector and up and down the country and really helps the leadership teams better understand their workforce, their culture and the signals hidden inside their people data. Sonia, thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast.
Thank you.
We look forward to hearing some of your insight.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Maybe you could start by telling us just a little bit about some of those patterns that I've mentioned there that maybe you come across when you're looking at some of the care providers you work with, their data and their staff retention records.
Okay, so I think there's two kind of clients that we work with. There's the client that comes to us because there's been a problem and it's all kind of blown up, and then they've come to us and they've gone, we've got this going on. We think this is a disciplinary issue. Somebody's raised a grievance against somebody, somebody's leaving and their resignation is 3 pages long and it's all, so that they're kind of coming to us with a problem after the event usually, and we're then coming in to kind of look at what's happening. And then there's a different kind of client that we work with, and they are a little bit more strategic. They understand that their people in their organisation are, extremely important, especially in the care sector. And, they might have some governance issues. They might not be happy with their contracts. They might be fed up with their generic policies. And so they're kind of coming to us preempting, and they want to work on their, what we would call like foundations, their strategy, their culture. So there's two kind of clients that we work with. And what I would say is, in the first style of client where there's been an issue and they've come to us and we start unpicking a whole story, of what's being presented to us. So let's say we have some unhappy members of staff, and we've had some grievances. Maybe there's a collective grievance, or there's 2 or 3 grievances raised against a manager. We then start looking at what's happening here, and we'll investigate. We'll follow a process, and we'll impartially investigate. And as part of that, we have to collect data. We have to collect information. Sometimes that's witness statements. Sometimes that's CCTV footage. Sometimes that's logging in sheets. It could be anything. It depends on, you know, what's being said about somebody. And then you start building up a picture of the way that they run in this organization. Are they very reactive? Is it always just putting out a different fire every different hour? Have they got embedded people processes? A lot of the time, even though we have CQC as a regulator, there are some very questionable practices that we see. And a lot of the time there's gaps. There's gaps in that person's references. There's gaps in the recruitment process. DBSs are out of date. Dealing with a client at the moment where the DBS was, somebody joined them in 2017, and the DBS was from 2009, and it's got convictions on it. So, and now we're in, you know, we are where we are, and we're picking this up kind of 9 years later because there's an issue with this employee. So you go back and you start seeing actually just the story was telling you a story, but people, I don't know, you know, the clients that we work with, they want to give it 100%, but like I said, they're running around, they're pulled in 100 different directions. Managers might have a gut feeling about something, but by the time they've had time to register it, they're on to the next thing, and they're on to the next thing. So they haven't got the kind of processes in place. So the information might all be up here, but they're not kind of recording the data in the right way for us to be able to go, oh, there's a pattern, oh, there's a trend. Oh, actually, because we're on the outside, we can see it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of us as a sector, we're quite reactive, aren't we? It's really hard to get into this proactive stage where things are just flowing. There's just this rhyme and rhythm. And I think part of that is because, especially for managers, it's a tough role, isn't it? It's not an easy job being a registered manager. And, you know, getting out of that firefighting state to actually be able to have the time to step back, to review, to be able to, as you say, get some of those things that are up in our heads down into a process or into a system, can be really, really challenging. And, you know, we could talk about data all we want, but any system you use or any process that you have, the data you get out is only going to be as good as the data that you put in. So it's so important, as you say, that we have the space, the time, the knowledge, and the ability to record good data, because that will feed into us, hopefully making really good decisions, right? It'll help us, as we said, identify maybe where somebody is not quite where we want them to be, or there is a slight issue that we can identify early. It really helps us nip that in the bud really, really early in the process, right?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, we are working with registered managers that sometimes, I'm going to be open and honest, they haven't had the support that they need. They're really, really good operationally. They really understand the sector. They really understand their team, but nobody's kind of helped them and supported them and even thought that actually we need to give them a bit of time. We need to develop and, you know, invest in our registered manager for them to feel comfortable in having certain conversations with members of staff about certain things, to give them the skill set that they need, and actually having the right systems in place. You know, we work, the kind of providers that are coming to us aren't interested in a generic, you know, here's a link, download a template for this, because everything that we do is very much geared to that client, that sector, you know, that regulator, and their culture. So it's very, very individual service. So even when you have got, you know, even when you do think, oh, well, we've got a provider for HR and I'm going to go and download a form, if the form isn't asking the right questions, and I can't tell you how many return to work forms I've seen that don't ask the right questions. It's really frustrating, because it's such a great opportunity to have a certain kind of a conversation with a member of staff when they're returning from any level of sickness, and we're just missing opportunities. So if I do just touch on sickness a little bit, and the reason why this is a very hot topic at the moment is because there's so many reasons. First of all, when you're not recording your sickness properly and you're not dealing with it properly, you aren't being consistent, and you aren't kind of setting your standard for what isn't acceptable. So you might have a policy that's gathering dust over here that you never use, and you don't know what it says, and you just kind of, you just wing it every time somebody's going off sick, because you're in, I've got to cover the shift mode rather than what's going on with this person. So that's the first thing. So you kind of need something that really works together for you. So a policy that works for you, but also statutory sick pay is going to become a day one right very, very soon. The eligibility criteria is going, and every care provider that we speak to is really nervous about this. Now, the longer term clients that we've been working with, we've already got really good systems in place. We've got robust contracts of employment with fair clauses around sickness absence notification, what the processes are, occupational health reports, and a lot of contracts are missing that. A lot of policies are missing that. And then you've got your return to work forms. Now, somebody might think, well, that's just a tick box exercise, but actually it's an opportunity to have 10, 15 minutes with somebody. And it's not just about, are you well enough for work? It's, did they follow the correct sickness absence notification process? Did they call us, not text or email or get their mum to ring or their neighbour to call or whatever? Did they call us?
We've all had that. We've all had it.
We've all had it. Let's make sickness absence notification a really, really clear, simple process about what we do and don't accept. How long were they off sick for? Did they see their GP? Is there any relating factors at work that have contributed to their sickness? Really important for potentially down the line, any kind of claims that come in, because we live in that world. But then also, how many days have they had off sick in the last rolling 12-month period? But then also, is there a pattern? And this is where the data is really important. Is it always a Friday? Is it always a Monday? Is it always after a bank holiday? Is it just before annual leave or just after annual leave? Is it always a Tuesday because actually that's a day that they just don't have any childcare? And actually, is it even their sickness? Because what we see a lot in this sector is, I'm really sorry, my child's unwell, they've got chicken pox or they've got a cold and I can't come in today, so I need to take the day off sick. Oh, okay, that's fine. That's not your sickness. That's a different kind of leave. But we have seen that being misrecorded. So all of that tells us a story about what's going on with this individual. Do they need an occupational health referral? And the reason, some people might think, well, what's that got to do with retention? If I'm working in a team where I am present and I turn up for work, even when I'm not feeling 100%, but I give it my all because I know these shifts need to be covered. I know we have a duty to whoever we are looking after, whoever it is that we're caring for, and we need to make sure that we run, successfully. And then I've got two people in my team who aren't, and I know that they're always doing this, but my manager doesn't really do anything about it because I don't have the confidence. We don't have the processes in place. We don't have the systems to record it. It's not really taken very seriously, and they're just allowed to get away with it because they work a Saturday occasionally and they really need them to work a Saturday. How am I going to feel? I'm going to feel disengaged.
Yeah, that consistency, you're absolutely right, is just so important, isn't it, across the board, and building those habits, building those systems and processes so that we are on top of all of those things you've said. And it's interesting because it reminds me of an issue we had at one of our services a couple of years ago, where, again, we were very fortunate. We were collecting an awful lot of this really good data. And we were able to identify there was a pattern. And actually, as it turns out, it wasn't anything to do with sickness. It was bus times, and it was unreliable bus time schedules. As a provider, that's so powerful, and that's impacted our retention rate, because we were able to identify, well, actually, I'm not going to put you down to start at 8 o'clock then. We'll put you down for a 8:30 start. We can manage that internally, but at least then you're going to feel better. You don't feel like you're letting the team down. And that's trying to turn a positive into a negative. But we're only able to identify that, as you rightly say, because we had the data, we were collecting those clock in times, we were making sure we were being following up with those conversations about, well, why are you 15 minutes late? Why are you 20 minutes late? And that, again, it just builds that fairness. And as much as, we have all of the values plastered across our walls in our services, and we hold ourselves to account to them and our team members accountable to them as well, we have to ensure that, we're being fair to our team members. And I would much rather not lose that person by going, you're late all the time, thank you very much, we don't need you anymore, but work with them and find a solution, because that will help us retain our staff. And the people pillar we often talk about in the DigiHive, for me, it's our most important pillar, because without our team, without our members, without the people who are delivering care, or, in the kitchens or maintenance team, the whole of the rest of the service doesn't work and doesn't operate, does it? So
no, it doesn't. It's so important. And that data is really important, because I remember actually one of my, I was quite new to HR. I was in a junior-ish role, and that data really helped me deal with an employee who started having sickness. And when I looked at this individual's records, this person had kind of like 3 years of no sickness, and then all of a sudden this sickness started. So it kind of, the system alerted, I had a look at the data. We had like a wellbeing meeting, a check-in, and it transpires that actually her dad was going through something, and she needed some time in the mornings before somebody else could come in and take over, because they had some carer issues. So actually just giving her that bit of flexibility, there was no more sickness, because she was able to do her job, because we'd had the conversation. But the data proved that this was an employee that doesn't really tend to go off sick, and it picked it up. So it is so important, because then it can direct those conversations.
Are you finding that a lot of providers, in your experience of having worked in the sector for a number of years, it's often quite difficult to find that finite piece of information in paper records, isn't it? It's not very straightforward.
Oh my gosh, it is really hard. And sometimes we're asking for information and they're just kind of saying, we haven't got it. We had a conversation, we didn't really make a note of it. Or what we've got is like, let's talk about supervisions, right? We've got, we do supervisions, but actually all you've got is just tick, tick, tick on these. There's nothing. It's not telling us anything. And so actually we're really missing a lot of information. And I'll tell you where it gets really frustrating is when we're doing investigations, like, really serious gross misconduct is quite apparent, but we have to kind of look at the evidence and we have to gather evidence. And we've got a client that's really frustrated because their registered manager or whoever it is has gone and done something. They've trusted them to carry out a payroll exercise, for example, and they haven't got the right processes in place. And because they haven't got the right processes and governance and systems in place, we haven't quite got the evidence there, and then you just kind of see the provider go, oh, it's something I've wanted to do and something I needed to get to. Whereas when we're going in and it's all on a system, the login, the clock in times, the clock out times are there, they haven't ticked this, or they've done this, or they haven't done that, or the process is very, very clear. We write a lot of standard operating procedures for the clients where we do all of their HR, because we have a process. And people at every stage have accountability and responsibility and tasks assigned to them, and it can't move along until it's been done appropriately. And the reason why we have that is for lots of reasons. But when we're in this situation where it's all gone wrong and it's all blown up, it's a bit like that Spider-Man meme where you've got different Spider-Mans and they're all kind of pointing the finger at each other. It's exactly that, because we haven't got enough data and evidence to be able to run a process. And then somebody might say, well, what's that going to do with retention? Well, again, if I'm the other person in the team that's always showing up, that wasn't fudging payroll records, that wasn't doing this and knew this was going on, I'm going to get disengaged. They're not dealing with sickness. This is happening. I'm not going to stay, because I want to go somewhere where I'm valued and there is a level of consistency amongst the team and the way things are dealt with. And I'll be honest with you, in this sector, we don't have that enough.
Yeah. I want to bring you back to supervisions. You mentioned a really important point there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good point for us to maybe follow up on, is that most care homes do their supervisions. And you did the little tick box there. I couldn't agree with you more. I think a lot of providers sometimes we work with, and we have conversations with, supervisions is just tick box, right? It's just to keep the regulator happy, as you said earlier on. If we're doing supervisions, it doesn't mean that we are automatically supporting retention. Why don't we do that? What is there that you could maybe give us as a top tip as to how the supervision could feed into that all-important retaining our staff? What can we be doing better as providers?
I'll bring this into not just supervisions, but inductions and appraisals as well. So what we see is that manager is sitting down with an individual, and first of all, they haven't got the right amount of time allocated to it. They've ran in from somewhere else, so they're not in the right headspace to just have 5 minutes before, going in and preparing with data before they go into that supervision. And the other thing, which is my pet hate in HR, is generic forms, policies, generic contracts, and we see them so much in this sector. A lot of them aren't up to kind of legal compliance or best practice compliance. I really don't know how some of those providers that provide them are still able to provide them. It's questionable. So you have very, very poor forms. You have a lot of tick box. You have people rushing. You don't have people spending 5 minutes preparing, and the right questions and the right conversations aren't happening. Part of that conversation is happening, but not all of it. So, for example, I'm going to talk about probation. I'm going to link this in. Probation is something that we see that is done quite poorly in this sector. And most of the time, the manager's calling us going, I just want to dismiss this person. I just want to terminate them because are there any in probation? And okay, did you have a conversation? Have you offered training? Have you followed a probation procedure? No, none of that. The person doesn't even know. I haven't even. So, there's a lot of that goes on. But in January 2027, after 6 months of continuous employment, an employee will have full employment rights for kind of dismissal claims and everything else. At the moment, it's 2 years. So we've now, instead of got 2 years of short service dismissals, we're going to have 6 months. So probations they've got to be so tight and so spot on for each individual organisation, because if we want to move down some kind of a termination route, we're not really going to be able to do it without an additional potential claim coming on after that 6 month period. So I'm talking to people and they're going, oh my God, never knew that. All right, we need to start looking at our probations. But just generally, when you're having your probation conversations, have them regularly, make sure they're recorded. We deal with quite a structured process for probation, and we ask questions like the manager needs to go away and gather the data. Has this person completed all of their training? Because in HR, one of the pet peeves is we're always chasing and they haven't completed their training and they haven't done this and they haven't done that. And the manager's gone and signed them off on probation, but this individual hasn't met the basic standards. So link that into your supervisions, link it into your appraisals, link it into your probation reviews. Another one for supervisions and appraisals is where we're chasing for things like updated car insurance. Have they, they're due a new DBS, and we're chasing. These are really important compliance things because they build a picture about the employee, you see. If that employee is just not coming back to you, their DBS is 3 months out of date now, we're going to be in trouble if CQC turn up on the door and pick that up. But actually, if we're building it into those conversations that we're having regularly, what are we showing our employees? Compliance is important. We take our safeguarding really seriously. Training is really important. So actually, we're having a bit of a bigger conversation. And what I would say about supervision is it should be a little bit easier to do. So systems and processes that make it much easier to record that information. I don't know, maybe it's just your system captures you speaking and it makes the AI notes and it just goes directly in. How easy would that be, rather than having to, and again, that gives us the data, that means we're having the right conversations. Structure is really important.
Absolutely.
But recording it and making sure that we've got it.
And again, it's having that all important information. So next time when you meet again in a couple of months' time, you've got that conversation. I think one thing, again, I heard this a few years ago that we implemented within our services was our strive was to make our supervisions as personalised as what our care plans are for our residents.
Absolutely.
And I think that can really feed into positive relationships with the team. It builds that consistency you've spoken about if they're being held regularly. But it's also that other really important word, quality, isn't it? As you say, you don't just want tick boxes. It's that supervision is going to be meaningful for us as the leadership team, but also for the person who's giving up their time to come along to the supervision, the employee. So, if we can personalize those and really, as you say, tailor those so that we are helping them on a specific maybe career development pathway they want to do, or just to celebrate something they've done amazingly. I think all these things can feed from that. But as you say, having that reliable, regular recording mechanism, whatever that might be. Hopefully it's digital, because we think that's obviously it's the way forward. It can just really help.
It is. And I like that you mentioned about having those conversations, because actually, I'll be honest with you, I think retention, well, I don't just think, I kind of know from all the data that we've collected and all the hundreds of clients that we work with, right? Retention starts when you recruit somebody. So retention starts when how you speak to them on the phone, or how you email them about arranging an interview, how quickly you do that, how quickly you go back to them, how well and structured you onboard them, how quickly you get documents out to them. This is all retention, because this is you giving off an impression to your new starter. Then comes the induction. And again, induction is, we just need someone to fill that shift, and can you just go over there? And actually no one's taken the time to welcome this new person to our organisation, have the right conversations, yes, go through policies, go through process, but actually let's get to know you a little bit. What do you like doing in your spare time? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? How can we help you get there? How can we support you in your journey what kind of questions do you feel you'd like to ask, but you're a little bit nervous to? And then, plastering it everywhere. There's no such thing as a silly question. Don't feel bad about asking the same question twice. Giving them a buddy system, all these kind of things, they build that retention, because actually it's a lot of new starters that come into your organisation, don't have the best candidate experience, come in, don't have a very good induction, and decide to leave quite quickly. But it's just about when they're going to do it, because then it started off downhill and then everything just goes down from that point. But there's no point in having those conversations about where do you want to be in 5 years? What can we do for you? If you're not going to record it anywhere, and we're not then going to go back to those conversations regularly and support them to kind of say, right, in your first 3 months, you mentioned this, and we've actually got some training coming up. Would you be interested in this? And it all then ties in. But the other reason why these conversations are really important to be recorded is because what we see a lot, luckily, like our clients don't get themselves into tribunal messes, but and tribunal rates are only going to skyrocket with all the new changes with the Employment Rights Act. It's just a fact. But if you find yourself in that situation and you've got tons of evidence where you are supporting this person, you're having conversations, they're given opportunities and a platform and a voice to talk about what they'd like to do differently, or how they're being supported, or that they feel supported, all of that builds a picture and a record of how things are working in your organisation. Because when a claim comes against you, you have to provide the evidence as an employer. So we work backwards. We don't ever want to get in that situation, but if we did, what have we got? And we want all of that process recorded in the right way, not just for the data, not just for the stats, but from a risk perspective, from an employment law perspective.
Yeah, it's just building that body of evidence, isn't it? You're absolutely right. And I love that analogy. Work it backwards. So make sure that we've got those systems in place. And I love that takeaway you mentioned there as well at the beginning around retention starts from the moment you offer somebody that role. I think that's so powerful and so useful, because as you say, all too often as leaders and as care leaders in the sector, we believe that staff retention is unpredictable. But actually, if that whole journey from when somebody's applied to you for a role, as you say, the interview process, what will have you, that's all building that, hopefully, that long-standing goodwill that will help you retain your staff. And as you say, it's systems and processes which are so important.
So important.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say in terms of practical applications, realistic as a busy care home, if you were to give somebody one tip to go away with today, what would that be for them, Sonia? What do you think is one thing that people could practically take away from today's conversation and implement in their home that would have the biggest bang for their buck, the biggest impact for them?
Okay, I mean, I've probably got about 5 or 6 because
you could do 5 or 6.
But I mean, just because of the Employment Rights Act and what's coming up with that, and there's a few things that I'm really worried about that care providers don't know is coming. I'm gonna
please share them. Please share them.
So I think everybody is very focused on the sick pay and day one SSP. So yes, your sickness, like I said, your sickness absence notifications, what's in your contract, what's in your policy, capturing the right data in your return to work forms. You need to start doing that. You need to start actively, properly managing sickness, having the right return to works, giving people the support where they need it. But there is something called the Fair Work Agency that is coming in, and just not enough people know about this. Now, we've had some clients share, and I've had like even family members and friends share these letters that they've been getting, like, official government letters talking about what do you get paid, and are you being paid for training, and are you on a 0 hours contract, all this kind of, because basically they're collating data right now for the Fair Work Agency for enforcement. And one thing, we regularly pick up on with our clients and we move them away from because of the risk is this thing about them not paying for training. Training is work time, and you will start finding claims brought against you via the Fair Work Agency if it comes to their attention. Not necessarily the individual employee bringing that claim, but the Fair Work Agency bringing that on their behalf. So your data, in terms of not just your sickness data, but how many hours are people working, what's the rate of pay, what's their average hours, all the changes that are coming with 0 hours and things like that are extremely important. The other thing that is not such a big deal in care at the moment, but I feel it's going to be, is trade union recognition.
Mm-hmm.
The whole process around trade union recognition is having a huge overhaul, and what we're seeing is potentially a very, very small percentage of your organisation being able to enforce trade union recognition for you as a business. And I'm talking, depending on the size of your organisation, as little as 2 or 3 people can now bring that change in. Are you ready as a provider to sit around a table and have pay negotiations and contract negotiations with trade unions? And if you're not, you need to. So we're helping a lot of clients do that right now. But one of the things that is driving that is their data. The data here is really important. It's not going to be, well, we can't afford to do that, or we can't afford, well, actually, our data shows. And actually, the reason why we're bringing in this new sickness absence policy, let's say it's kind of, we're hitting a brick wall with the trade union about some potential overhauls that we want to do with sickness. Well, actually, we've got the stats, and this is how it's impacting the employees. So actually, this is something we need to work on. So I think, you really need to, data is just so important, but you need to be planning, you need to be strategic. And the other thing I would say is don't just rely on AI to do that with you, because the most commonly used AIs, I use ChatGPT as one, is at least running a year out of date. It doesn't know what's happening. It keeps calling the Employment Rights Act, the Employment Rights Bill. In its head, it hasn't quite got to because it's old, it runs a year behind. So get advice from professionals and experts about what you need to do here. So start thinking about what data you do want to record. Like I said, sickness absence is a big one. Start looking at making sure that your working hours your overtime, the training time is all recorded in a really easy way. Even if you're just using trackers, great, but record it. And make sure that you are arming yourself with data for and getting ready for what trade union recognition might look like. I'm speaking to so many people and they're just like, no, that won't happen to us, that won't happen to us. But you know what, over a last couple of years, we've worked with some providers who've had trade union recognition and they just weren't ready for it. And they've come to us and they've said, if you weren't with us and if you didn't help us through that whoa, we don't know where we would have been right now. We wouldn't have even had a business, because we wouldn't have been able to afford what was being forced on us or what was happening. So yeah, this is huge. And again, data really supports that. And I think people need to stop saying that retention is just a sector-wide thing. Oh, it's just adult social care. Okay, it is, but it's because everyone's doing the same thing in the same way, just in different places all over the country. We need to tackle it differently. And there are some providers out there that are doing it really, really well. They're thinking outside the box. They're doing things very differently. And they are happy to share what they're doing. So, go and talk to them, get tips, get advice. But anything that you do when it comes to people, get some HR advice, because sometimes people come to us and they're like, oh, we're over on hours and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and we've already talked to the staff, and we're like, no, you can't do that. There's a consultation process, there's a statutory process that we have to follow. So get the right advice, and I think get yourself on some webinars for knowing what's coming.
Sonia, that's so incredibly helpful. I'm sure all the members of our community will find that totally fascinating. And that's why I suppose, this learning from one another, this peer support, this peer community, is kind of why we built the DigiHive, because we want to be able to help providers connect with one another. There are always some of those providers that are maybe slightly ahead of the journey, maybe some of those that have had other challenges that aren't quite as far ahead as they'd like to be. And that's why we have our academy offering for our DigiHive community members, where this mentoring and coaching and this peer support is so important, because one of the most beautiful things about our sector is everyone's willingness to share their experiences, to talk about what they're doing, what's working, what hasn't worked for them. And with experienced professionals such as yourself willing to share their knowledge about what they're doing across their sector and the specific issues that they're working with, is so valuable. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights today. It's been so incredible to hear some of your thoughts on where things are going. And I think if there's one idea that maybe the people that are listening to the session can leave with, is that I think staff retention, it shouldn't be random, and it rarely should be random. I think there are always some signals or some signs. Maybe there's some patterns in the absences that you've identified, or some of those conversations in the supervisions that people are happening, or maybe a lack of engagement in that training and development. So the challenge isn't, I don't think, that we have the information. It's about making the time to analyze that data and having the space to do that in an effective way. And let's be honest, as you mentioned, some of those challenges that are on the horizon for us, the challenges we face as a sector aren't going to slow down. But I think one thing that we can do is not ignore some of these small signals that may be happening and that can lead to resignations, because it's ultimately important. We want to retain the amazing people that dedicate themselves to work in this sector, and as I said, this sector is all about people. So hopefully for those listening, if the conversation has resonated with you, and you'd like to continue learning alongside other care home leaders, I've mentioned our DigiHive community and our academy offering as well. Please feel free to click the link in the show notes and have a check of what we're doing. And if it's for you, please sign up, and we'll welcome you along to one of our next mentoring sessions. But all it leaves for me to do is, Sonia, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been very insightful. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Inside the Care Home.
Thank you.
Running a care home rarely gives you time to step back and think. Most days you're just moving from one decision and on to the next. But this podcast exists to pause that momentum for a moment, to look at what's actually happening inside care homes, the pressures, the trade-offs, the things that don't always make it into the reports or the meetings. So if something in this episode felt familiar, I hope that's intentional. These conversations aren't about having perfect answers. They're about seeing the reality more clearly, so the next decision is better than the one before. I'll continue this inside look next time. This is Inside the Care Home, an honest look at the decisions and realities behind running care homes today. Thanks for listening.